Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking to the entrepreneurial businesswoman and ex-KC who built an English sparkling wine brand from the ground up. And we're going to talk a bit about some of the risks taken, some of the lessons learned, and the realities of what it takes to scale a business. So, Wendy Woods-Waite, how nice to see you today.
It's great to see you.
We're going to cover lots of ground, but I think it is only fair to start with the question, what made you decide to stop being a King's Counsel, and indeed your husband as well, to give up his job in finance and to set off on this incredible journey to set up your own sparkling wine business?
We'd always loved wine. We probably drank far too much of it, but we were definitely people who enjoyed wine. We were judges in wine competitions, but it was all about finished wines. And then we actually tasted, we were given a bottle of English sparkling in the days when England wasn't renowned for having fabulous wine. And we rather suspiciously put it at the back of the cellar, determined never to touch it. And then actually we were living in Fulham and we got robbed, and there was a horrible grim day where the burglars went everywhere and then the police went everywhere. And Charles went and retrieved this bottle from the cellar and said, "Day can't get any worse." And we realized how fabulous English sparkling could be. So I think, and at that stage, Charles and I, we didn't have any joint ventures apart from our children. We looked around for somewhere to plant. We were determined to make really good sparkling wine here in England.
So interesting. And of course, you have to call it sparkling wine. You're not allowed to call it champagne, right?
Champagne comes from champagne, which
Yeah,
just means field,
yeah.
countryside, that bit.
Yeah, sparkling wine it is. And so you took that plunge, and then that was how long ago?
Ooh, we made the decision in the early 2000s, but in fact, it took us 5 years to find the site. We started in Kent, went all the way over to Cornwall, kept turning up in places with a trowel and digging up little holes. And there was almost no information in those days about what would be a good site. And then my father-in-law, who was adorable but knew nothing about wines or vines or whatever. In fact, you definitely had to rush him to the wine shop just to make sure he didn't buy anything that's the cheapest or nastiest. But he saw in the Chichester Observer that there was a particular farm that was up for sale. And he said, "Oh, it's absolutely perfect." And my children rolled their eyes and said, "Another weekend ruined." But out we trudged. And it's this place, and nowhere is perfect, but this is as good as it can be. It really is very good indeed.
So what do you look for? If what define good in that sense?
Depending on where you are in the world, as the world is getting hotter, so most vineyards in the world are burning. In fact, I've been to vineyards where it looks as if someone's put a flamethrower over the vines. So there you'd be looking for shade and water. But in England, because we're still where we are geographically on the globe, you're looking for good drainage and light and air through the canopy. You want sunlight and warmth. So I'm on a sort of soil which is called green sand rock, which is fantastic. Honestly, it's our secret weapon. We don't get frosted. So at the moment, as you might know, there are still cold nights,
Yeah.
and other people are out there lighting bougies or got their little heaters and fans out and whatever to save the vines because we've had bud burst. And I'm sorry to say that Charles and I just sleep through. It's absolutely fine. We just don't get frosted.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So where else are people growing vines at the moment in at scale in England?
So I think still 75% of them are in the south. There are vineyards all over the place. There is a Chateau Hebrides, which does Pinot Noir. So if you're feeling adventurous,
Okay.
but most of them are in the south, mostly in the southeast. Excitingly, you've probably seen in the press, there are lots of new vineyards in Essex, in the Crouch Valley.
Yes.
Fantastic Pinot Noir and some Chardonnay. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. Genuinely, England is the most exciting place in the world to make wine right now. And it's because there's almost no regulation. The climate is in our favor. We have this fantastic Goldilocks climate right now. not too hot, not too cold, so you can maintain the acidity, but you can get proper fruit ripeness. It's
Yeah.
just a joy.
Brilliant. That is so exciting to hear that because it's just not what people would have grown up thinking.
No, people were quite rightly incredibly rude about English wine because there were some terrible tongue scrapers. There really were, but it's not like that now.
And how about, I'm sure there's all sorts of things that spring to mind when you think of what were the challenges, but finding the right labour and the right team, how did you go about doing that?
That was a major challenge because there wasn't a cohort of people who knew what they were doing in Vineyard. And there were some agencies that popped up, but some of them maybe didn't treat their people in the way that I would like to treat people. And so we ended up finding we're a very small team here, and we ended up training our people ourselves. And it's been really good. And I'm always very touched because at Harvest, our team expands enormously. And the same people come back year after year, and they are genuinely looking after us. They'll keep an eye on what's coming in, and you find them with pictures of our grapes on social media saying, these are fantastic, even for Romania. And people saying, take your thumb off the scale because it looks like an enormous bunch that they're weighing. So people are very invested. And I love that because I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah. And what about the sort of the machinery and the whole sort of the kit that so you people is one thing, and then there's a whole load of kit presumably that go with the people.
So much kit. I don't know whether you remember, but when I was little, there used to be an advert on the TV. It was Tonka toys for big tough boys. And if you're like that, there are lots and lots of big Tonka toys that you have. One of the things, because I very strongly feel that if you have a business, you don't have to do everything. Clearly, you don't, but you ought to be able to know how to do everything. We made sure that we learned how to drive tractors and forklifts and telehandlers. And obviously, we operate winery machinery like the press and the disgorging line and things like that. So, bit of a learning curve, but it's really important that you can do that. And yeah, so I've got skills.
I bet there's nothing like learning on the job and learning on the second job.
I didn't ever have to have a pallet truck when I was at the bar.
No, exactly. Just probably the drinking end from time to time. And what about skepticism and just obstacles in terms of people not buying into what you were trying to do? And just because I know as an entrepreneur as well, it is so driven by your enthusiasm, your appetite for risk, your vision, and the passion. And I'm assuming you must have encountered quite a few people along the way who you were quite early, as you said, anyway, into it. It would be potentially easier to do today than it was then. Yeah, but how did you deal with
Yes, there was all sorts of skepticism. The skepticism about us is very interesting because there was a sort of these types down from London who don't know anything about viticulture or viniculture. And there was a sort of an assumption first that we wouldn't really want to be involved, that when we visited our vineyard, I don't know, we'd expect trumpets and rose petals and fanfares and that sort of stuff. There wasn't this idea that actually this was a choice that we were making. So there is always, even now, I think there's a bit of a surprise that we're quite so hands-on and hands-in as we definite. So I think there was that. And then I think also there was huge skepticism about English wine generally. Could you make something that was good? And that was the real risk in those days because it hadn't really proved itself. And you are so many years in before you produce a bottle that then goes out to market. You can
yeah.
never, you think you're right, but the proof doesn't come until you're down track some way. And I think also there was the family weren't at all pleased. As I said, the children weren't thrilled. Even my parents were slightly nonplussed. You're going to be a farmer. I think they thought this was incredibly odd. And you just have to do it, and then the wine proves itself. But you have to have confidence in yourself a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and partly because you said it's a big upfront investment because the time frames. So you get the kit, you hire a team, even if it's a small team, you've got to then do sew it and so on. And what are the sorts of things that, apart from weather or potentially driven by weather, what are the bad things that can happen? The little creatures that pop up that when you're hoping they don't, and what sort of creatures are they?
This is the nice thing about not having centuries of monoculture. We haven't bred a whole lot of pests. We get very few diseases. It's basically the mildews you get with your roses or botrytis. Those are the only things that attack the grapes. And then genuinely, my two big pests are a badger that comes into row 97 south and eats all the Pinot Noir, the low-hanging Pinot Noir. I'm calling him, I've no idea what his gender is, but he has unfortunate bathroom habits. And so I'm assuming it's him. And then wasps. So I don't know whether you know this. I didn't know this before I started growing grapes, but wasps are rely on their young to feed themselves. And so when that year the colony is all adult, they start starving. So they go after the protein, your ham sandwich at your picnic initially. But then towards the end of the year, they are desperate for sugar.
Yeah.
And so if they can, they'll take that from the grapes. So I sometimes viewed a little oddly by my neighbours because at the end of each post of each row of grapes, I put a lovely little bit of sugar water with some apple cider vinegar in it to attract the wasps. And some of them do die, but I've thought about it and I have decided that if I was starving, I'd prefer to drown in sugar than to starve from tummy ache. And all the wasps die apart from the queen at the end of the year. But then that badgers eat wasps. I go along and fill up my little cups of sugar water, and the badger can empty them quicker than I can fill them because he
Wow.
thinks caramelized wasps. This is the biggest sweet shop in Sussex. Yeah, no, it's those are my two main pests, really.
Okay, that's especially the badger. I wouldn't have guessed that one. Very interesting. So let's think a little bit about, we talked a bit about the challenges, but also how did you, if we think about transferable skills, what was it that you, all those years in law and indeed in finance for Charles, how have they helped you bring the business along?
It was a bit of shock, really, because I had always thought of myself as a very laid back, mellow sort of person. And it turns out that I am a complete details control freak martinet. And unfortunately, you take your personality with you. So I think quite a lot of my former colleagues think that I waft about the place in white linens, occasionally snipping something. But the reality is that if you're a details person, you're a details person. So it has to, that was another reason why we wanted to train our own team to make sure it was done in the way that we considered to be the best way. So I think drilling down into the details, also because we hadn't come from a Vitty background. I would have loved to have been born into a lovely Burgundian family, but it didn't happen. So we had to learn. And so we spoke to lots of experts. All the experts disagreed with each other. So I think the ability to cross-examine a little bit helped because if they couldn't give you a reason or at least a cause and effect for what they were proposing, you could give that less weight. And also, I think because we didn't know everything, we didn't have any baggage. So we weren't going to do it either exactly in the way that our father did it, or alternatively, we absolutely weren't going to do it in the way that our father did it. We just neutral, which meant that you could analyze things on their own merits and you could also use just a bit of common sense. I remember we went regenerative pretty early on because it made sense. And if you have been, I don't know, gardening and you decide to go no dig in your garden, you suddenly realize that tilling your vineyard probably isn't such a great idea for soil health. And in the same way that, Tim Spector's rather good on his microbiome, you realize that diversity of all sorts of things in your vineyard is a good idea. So because
It's very interesting. One of the other chats that I'm having is actually with someone who has really driven regenerative farming in Britain and has this big event every year called Groundswell. And it was exactly one of the things he was talking about, this the sort of the turnover of the soil. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it. And also, as you say, not being constrained given any prior experience, just thinking about it in the most natural way.
And also, I think because we are control freaks, and I'm now not embarrassed to say that, and because we only answer to ourselves, it's not, we don't have to answer to investors, then we can say, I'd like to do this. And if I'm wrong, I'll change my mind. And if I make an idiot of myself publicly and you all laugh at me, fair enough. I don't care. So
Yes.
it's absolutely fine. So I think it's quite good being able to experiment and see what things work and what don't. To be perfectly honest, I have made some absolute howlers. I did buy a lot of pilgrim geese who I thought would be beautiful at weeding. People use them for weeding between tobacco plants. And I thought, what a great idea. A little bit of extra manure in the vineyard, that's all good. God, these horrors, honestly, they attacked the vineyardies, tractors, visitors, big Arctic lorries that come in to deliver the bottles. They attacked everything. Yes, that wasn't my best idea.
They're not with you anymore, those.
No, they've gone to the big goosery in the sky. I think the fox got a bit close.
Yeah, that does
I
happen.
wasn't devastated.
And on the financial side, one of the things which I'm imagining, well, and I know as well from starting my own business, is financial discipline and really being thoughtful about where you're spending money, why you're spending it, where you're trying to get to, how much money have you got, how long could it last, and so on. And we were talking before about the kit, and I know farming kit is super expensive. So how did you think about how you spent money and actually attached to that marketing and PR, another place it's very easy to spend lots of money? How did you think about that in the round?
So, because we wanted to have complete control, it was obvious that as well as that, so we don't buy fruit from anywhere else. We grow everything that we use, which meant that we had to have a winery in the middle of the vineyard, which also meant that we had to have our nattily named secondary fermentation unit, where the entirety of our stock is basically a bottle doesn't leave us until someone buys it. So we had to have everything here. So that then means that you're spending quite a lot of money. So there's that. But also, I've seen other people do things that are just ridiculous. I don't know what it is about wine that makes people lose their heads, but I've seen someone do 7 years of PR before they've got a bottle of wine to sell, or employ a winemaker before they've got any grapes. So the poor old winemaker just sits there de-skilling. And I think the temptation is, because there are still a whole lot of experts out there telling you that you have to be a mini champagne house. I have to say, I always think of us as being basically a Burgundy family with bubbles rather than a mini champagne house. And the mindset is very different because oh, you've got to have a restaurant, a tourist center, and all this sort of stuff. And it's very easy to overspend. You have to be first mover in your export market. You can spend a lot of money that you don't really need to. And you can also spend a lot of money on kit. There's always the next new gadget. I'm a bit of a fiend. I love Vitibots. I really do. But you do have to say sometimes, is it
Yeah.
that much better?
Yeah.
You don't do it the whole time, but it's very easy to overspend, and lots of people are not profitable.
And you are.
Yes, so it took us a while to be profitable, a good long while.
Yeah.
As soon as we were, that was it. We closed the checkbook and then said, "There you go, baby. You stand on your own 2 feet." And I think it's a very important discipline.
Yeah. And how much of what you sell is sold abroad versus consumed
About
here?
a third. So we like export. Actually, it was a very good COVID lesson. Wine is usually sold either to the on trade, restaurants and bars and whatever, or the off trade, independent wine shops, that sort of stuff. So the on and off trade or direct to consumer. And it turns out that if you have a global pandemic, which we had not planned for,
No.
then all your restaurants everywhere in the world all close at the same time. So we realized that actually we should have something a bit more balanced and diverse. So about a third of ours goes out of the country immediately, and we export to Scandinavia, but our main markets are Norway and Finland within that, Japan, done to the States, and we've just got Azerbaijan, which I'm very excited about. So we export a bit, and then about a third of it goes to the on and off trade, and then a third to real actual people, either on the website, although people do tend to just, if they know me, they tend to drop me an email as well, or we do tours and tastings. So we have a cellar door here. So it's a nice balanced thing. I think it works really well.
Interesting on the tours and tastings. So you've basically opened up your home essentially to the public in that sense. So how often do people come around and do a tour and a taste?
Oh, they have to book. So we're very sniffy if they just turn up and whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, people can book pretty well anytime. We're open there. We have time slots a couple of times a day that get filled up, and then that's it. All they're free. But it's absolutely great. I have to tell you, one of the great joys, and I should say, I have lots of friends at the bar. I love other barristers. They are great. Don't think I didn't love the bar. I loved it. But the nice thing about wine is it's very grounding, and
Mm.
you don't have to have any knowledge whatsoever to be able to enjoy a glass of wine. And you meet all sorts of people who are absolutely lovely because people just want to have a good time. So they're delightful. They're not in the middle of some major crisis in their life. It's been great.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think actually that's again quite, that's a very entrepreneurial thing to say because you're sharing your passion with other people and you can come at it in so many different respects. It could be covering so many different subjects. In your case, it's sparkling wine and you're seeing the joy that can create for other people. And that is very exciting when it's your own thing.
That's the point. I think that we're all quite serious and intense about the way we grow grapes and make wine, but the drinking of it, I mean,
Yes.
that's just meant to be joy in a glass, isn't it? Yeah, that's when you see that happen, it's very special.
Yeah.
I have to say that the first time this completely came out of nowhere because I'm a hard old battle axe, really. But the first time a bottle of wine came off the line when it'd been filled up with wine, out of nowhere, I just burst into tears and threw myself around Thierry, who was managing the bottling line, who I'd only just met. And I have to say, for the whole week, he then walked all the way around the bottling line just in case I did it again. But it's a very emotional thing. And when this is a nice little tip. If anyone's there with a winemaker and you're tasting their wine, just remember someone tasting your wine, it's like being outdoors in your pajamas. You feel very vulnerable. So say
Yeah.
something nice, even if it's not true. If I hate a wine, I always say interesting and multi-dimensional because I couldn't bear to
Okay, I'll
say,
remember that.
yeah, exactly. So this is terrible. It would be too cruel.
And Wendy, just tell us, how did you come up with the name? Because it's Ambriel
Yes.
and names are so important. And it's one of the things we've got a story for why we ended up calling ourselves Netwealth. And I mentioned Groundswell, this regenerative farming festival. And so Ambriel, was it that led you to that?
So you've got to remember it was in 2008 when we planted. So English sparkling wine wasn't as well known as it is now. And you can see probably behind me there are some bottles and they look like champagne bottles. And we thought, oh, people are going to think that we're French. It was perfectly clear that we couldn't name the wine after the farm, which is Redfold, because that sounds very like Penfold, and we didn't want to get sued. And also, our surname is Outhwaite, that people really struggle with. It's very often Outhwaite, or on one occasion Auschwitz, but then I was cross-examining at the time. So we just didn't want to risk that. And we'd heard this story of, because we wanted, as you probably know, in many languages, the word for English and angel is the same, engel, in the Teutonic languages. And we'd heard a story of Pope Gregory, Roman slave market, sees some lads and says, "Who are they?" And is told they're angles. And he replies, and it's meant to be the first recorded pun in history, and I love puns. Non-Angli said Angeli, not Angles, but angels, and sent someone to go and convert Britain to Christianity. And so we thought we'll still that little motto because it's got a pun in it and he won't mind.
Yes.
And then we were trying to find an angelic name. So we took ambrosia, food of the gods, Gabriel, name of an angel, concision. There we were. But, and I made sure it wasn't trademarked, all was well, but we didn't Google. It turns out you should always Google. Other search engines are available because it turns out we've got a very hench angel logo. And
Yes.
it turns out that in the States, Ambriel is a little girl's name. So,
Oh,
slight dissonance.
okay. Interesting.
People
But
remember us though.
yes, exactly. And that's what you want. So I think it's very important that whoever's listening knows how to find you, how to find your absolutely delicious sparkling wine. So it sounds they can buy it direct, they can come in and see you and have a tour and a wine tasting. They can get their businesses to do a more sort of corporate type of order.
Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to pay you commission if you carry on like that. Yes, of course. Ambriel Sparkling is the website if they're interested. Have a little look. And we'd love to see them, honestly. It doesn't matter what you buy, just buy a bottle of wine somewhere and enjoy it. That's the thing. Wine is for sharing and for having fun.
Wendy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
It's so good to see you too. And happy birthday, Netwealth. What a fantastic thing.
Thank you.
Bye.